Do you own your stuff? Or does your stuff own you? Today, on Let the Church Be the Church. Ever since Adam and Eve chose the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil over obedience to God, the human race has had a tremendous propensity to acquire stuff and give the throne that only God is worthy of in their lives. I can still remember my very first car, a black and gold 1968 Dodge Charger. Man, I put hours of time, labor, and thousands of dollars into tricking out that car. I'm sure there was an idol in my life, sitting on the throne of my heart, right where God should be. My identity was tied up in the speed and the appearance and the sound of that car. It was a great car. Perhaps if you're real honest, there are some idols in your life as well. It might be money or power, a job title, even your education, or it could be the way you look, your shoes, your clothing, even another person. We all have things that we're attracted to, and some of them can take the wrong place in our lives. Even giants of the faith like Abraham and Paul struggled with this. In Genesis chapter 22, we see Abraham and his son Isaac. Now, Isaac was the child that God had promised Abraham years before, and all of the land, nation, and blessing of the Abrahamic covenant that God made with Abraham was tied up in the life of that boy. Now, God saw that Isaac had become an idol in Abraham's life, so he tested him by commanding him to offer Isaac as a burnt offering to God. That's a big test. Abraham, though, chose to obey, but just before he slayed his son, God stopped him and said, "Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your one and only son." That's in Genesis 22:12. At that very moment, Abraham slayed the idolatry in his life, willing to give even the son of his promise over to God. The Lord saw it, and he gave Abraham back his son, but not as a competitor to God, but as a child of his. And then God renewed his covenant with Abraham. In the life of Saul, who would become the Apostle Paul, we see the power of being owned by our things as well. Now, for Paul, it wasn't his child or belongings, but as a religious leader, it was an overweening pride in his zeal and in his accomplishments. Paul said in Philippians 3:4-6, he said, "If anyone else thinks he has reason to put confidence in the flesh, I have more. I was circumcised on the 8th day, of the people of Israel, the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews. In regard to the law, a Pharisee. As for zeal, I persecuted the church. As for legalistic righteousness, I was faultless." Is that out of line in his life? Yeah, you bet. But Paul and Abraham both learned a similar lesson, and here it is. The stuff of this world, given to us as a blessing by God, but it can become a curse when we allow it to usurp God's place in our lives. Instead of enriching us, it creates a desperate poverty in our soul, a scarcity of God himself, for whom we were made. In the case of both men, they set aside their idols and they placed God first, and after that, they received the greatest blessing of all, which is to walk more closely with their Lord. Nothing else can compare. Paul declared just a few verses later in Philippians 3, "But whatever was to my profit," all that stuff, my pedigree, all of that, "I now consider loss for the sake of Christ. What is more, I consider everything a loss compared to the surpassing greatness of knowing Jesus Christ my Lord, for whose sake I've lost all things. I consider them rubbish, that I may gain Christ." We set aside the lesser to get the more, the most. So, do you own your stuff, or does your stuff own you? We think it makes us richer, but given the wrong place in our lives, it leaves us far poorer. It is only in renouncing those things and setting them aside, setting them below God, offering them up to God, that we can be set free. Are you willing to do this? We will never experience God's fullness until we do. We'll never walk in his blessing until he is on the throne. We'll never experience the depth of love and joy and power and fullness of his abundant life until we remove and renounce everything in us that is competing with our God. And when we do that, He'll be on the throne, our life will be a blessing, and people will see His church be the church.
If this video was helpful to you, please give it a like and share it. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next one.